Welcome to Let's Be Well Together podcast. We're your wellness check-in team. We talk about different categories of wellness and seeking balance between them. There's overview info on our website, letsbewelltogether.com.
This is episode 50.
We hope our territorial acknowledgement improves allyship with Indigenous people within a reconciliation process. We're on the Haldeman Tract, located on the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge the presence and traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land.
And welcome back to another episode of Let's Be Well Together. It's Sammy and John here for another week. How are you doing, John?
I'm doing well. I'm having a good week, and so that's great. I'm getting back into the physical stuff, which I'm enjoying. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm still coming down, I think, from after the holidays, like slowly getting back to a normal schedule. Speaking of, though, I heard you had a social media post about some self-care topics and you wanted to chat about them.
Right. And I think people who listen know that I follow the Mental Health Commission of Canada on Instagram. They have great posts. I recommend anybody. It's the MHCC, so THEMHCC. And this one has the 4 self-care tips. Why don't we just read through them? I'll do the first one and we'll read through the 4. Sure. And then we can talk about a couple of them.
Let's do it.
So number 1 is feel the feelings. Emotions need motion.
And number 2 is gratitude journal. Put pen to paper.
The 3rd is 5 senses. Stop and smell those roses.
And the last one is sleep schedule. Maximize your Z's.
And we might get a chance to talk about the second to the last 2, I should say. I do note that you in an earlier episode talked about using the 5 senses to bring yourself to the moment. And I've tried that a few times, by the way, since you told me that. And I really like it.
Yeah, it's a great trick for sure.
Although sometimes I can't remember all 5. It takes a minute.
Yeah, I do that all the time. And I'm like, I should know these. I think we learned them in kindergarten. But
yeah, I know.
Sometimes I forget about like touch or something.
The reason I pulled this one out today is because on the last sign-off, you mentioned that you were thinking about doing some journaling and you found a poet that you like and she has this journaling exercise. And I saw this gratitude journal and I wondered, what are you hoping to get out of journaling? I don't know if you've started yet, but what do you hope to do? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah. So I actually have the book with me. So it's called Healing Through Words and it's by Rupi Kaur. So she's a poet. Basically, the whole point of this journal is to like spark creativity through healing, through journaling. And she kind of has like 4 sections and it goes from trauma to kind of like acceptance and love. And she basically gives like these little prompts. So I'm not someone who's ever really journaled before, other than in some courses, they made us do some journaling, but I was never great at it. So I really was drawn to this book because it gives you prompts. So it will ask you a question or show you a photo and you're supposed to kind of look at it and analyze it and then write. And I thought that was really cool for someone who's just starting out to journal. So I started a little bit and I'm enjoying it so far. I'm honestly hoping to just kind of like go on a healing journey of like self-love and acceptance and discovery and stuff like that.
The friend that I talked to who does journaling, I mentioned that you mentioned journaling and he said, it was interesting with him because he initially had this plan of things he wanted to write about. And so I love the idea that you have where you're just trying somebody to jog you and you do it. Eventually he got to the point though, where he wakes up and he likes to do it in the morning when he first wakes up. Yeah. And he says he doesn't have any plan. Like he just writes down whatever's crossing his mind and it seems to really help. And I do feel though, personally, that if I started journaling, I'd need to take your approach. Where I need some help first. Like, tell me what to journal. Tell me what to think about.
Yeah. Just like little ways to like get you started. And then maybe after you can continue. But I have a friend that's like that too. She's like a big journaler and she's able to just like write and write and write. And I've just never been able to really do that. So getting that little exercises or that help, I think will go a long way. Hopefully that's the hope.
The other advantage that I see is I suspect that one of the most challenging parts about journaling is just being able to find the time during the day and keep finding it because it's kind of like, so I haven't had much success in exercise. I didn't in the past where I was kind of that boot camp mentality, where
Yeah.
I'd let myself fall apart. And then at a certain point, I realized, oh, shoot, I got to get back in shape. And I'm like, okay, where's the boot camp? I'm going to go hard for 3 weeks or a month, and then everything is going to be great. And by the end of those 3 weeks, I'm like, yeah, I could find energy for those 3 weeks, but I got other stuff to do now.
Yeah.
As opposed to what I'm doing now, which is I found things that I love doing and I look forward to them. They're not really high intensity boot camp type stuff, but they're things I like to do. So I want to do them and I found time.
Yeah.
I suspect with journaling, like right now it's the new year, you got great intentions. It could be challenging to keep finding that time every day.
Definitely. Yeah. So I actually started following this girl on TikTok, and her whole platform is about like building healthy habits that like you're able to maintain and continue. And she talks about like habit stacking. So like for the first week, you're like starting your new habit, whether that's journaling or like waking up. And like her first habit that she started was she wakes up and she just chugs a glass of water. And then you do that for a week. And then the next week you add another one. So it's like slowly building those healthy habits. So I think that's also something like I'm trying to do here. So I'm going to hopefully, like what you said, like start in the morning. I'm going to wake up, have my breakfast, journal a little bit, and then get on with my day. And hopefully that also creates a habit of not sleeping in, because I do that quite a bit.
Right. And I won't get into it because I want to actually talk about the first point, but I just mentioned before we jumped on the air that sleep schedule number 4 is so important. And because Sheila has this early morning job, we've switched our routine where we're going to bed a lot earlier.
Right.
I would have thought that would be a horrible way to live my life, but it turns out that it's been amazing. I don't know why, but I don't know if maybe the body works better in sync with that schedule due to sunlight or whatever it is. And the other thing I've been adding now just in the last little while is I get up, do a few things, and I go to the gym.
Yeah.
And I'm at work and I'm feeling fantastic. I'm drinking lots more water, which is another habit. And that sleep schedule really seems to be a key to making it all come together.
Definitely. I agree. I definitely, like, I had a really good sleep schedule that was probably similar to yours, where it's going to bed pretty early, waking up early, and then the holidays happened. And then I've been sleeping in way too late. So I have to get back on that.
And the other thing I just want to jump in on before I move forward on the other point is I really, really like your concept of habit building. When I looked back to try and figure out why I was successful finally getting in shape when I finally did, I realized that I had used that habit stacking by accident. And, so in particular, especially when you're starting to lose weight, it's really hard initially to not have the energy, to not have the food. And so when I combined a whole bunch of things like, okay, I'm going to stop eating, I'm going to go to the gym, I'm going to do all this stuff, it didn't seem to work. But what did work is if I started by watching what I ate, got that under control, then I started doing some aerobics. Okay, now that's under control. And then I added weights. So I just love that idea and I hope it works for you.
Yeah. Then try it out.
So I have been putting off talking about number 1, feel the feelings, because I'm terrible at it. So I know you're supposed to. And, like right now, for example, my dad passed away recently and I'm seeing this in my mom. Fortunately, she is feeling the feelings. It's kind of challenging to see her in terms of the feelings she's feeling, things like anger and grief and all that stuff. But, I appreciate that you have to let yourself, and she said, I have to let myself feel these things. I've historically not been very good at it. I'm better at burying these things, ignoring these things. I don't know. So I don't really have an answer other than to say, I know there's a lot of merit to this concept and somehow I have to warm up to it.
Yeah. And honestly, I see that in a lot of people, like, my parents' age, your age, of like not feeling those feelings. And I think it stems probably from the way like your generation grew up versus my generation, and the generation after me is even better at it. Cause I'd say millennials are still like, we do have that habit as well of like burying them, but I think we're pretty good at understanding the feelings and like recognizing them. And then you have the Gen Zs who are afraid, like they're not afraid at all to tell you how exactly they're feeling.
Right.
They will be very open about it, which you got to admire about them. So I'm like, I feel like it just keeps getting better. It's an important one and something I've learned from like some people I know is that like you have to treat a feeling like it's passing through, and like it comes, you acknowledge it, you accept it, you maybe do some digging on why you're feeling this way, and then it keeps going. So I think it's important that when you are feeling these feelings to not like dwell in those, like say they're like sad, you're sad and you're dwelling in it, then you're just going to get like totally consumed by these feelings. So it's better to acknowledge it, recognize what's happening. Maybe there's something that happened that day that triggered you, and then move forward from it. So I think like recognizing and acknowledging is always the first step to feeling them.
I love that. It makes me think of I had this image in my head when you were saying that, of a river, so there's a river and it's flowing and you want it to keep flowing. And if you feel the feelings, it will. But what I tend to do is put up a dam and I stop the flow. I stick it in the background and I just end up with this massive dam that's just ready to burst. And I don't know what's going to happen when it eventually does. And then just a quick point too on the whole Gen Z and Gen X and all that stuff. It's interesting because a lot of people in my generation, it's like you scratch your head and say, what's wrong with the new generation, right? And you're saying, what's wrong with the old generation? And there probably are things wrong, but what I like too is to look for the things that are good about the other generation. So if next generations are getting better at feeling the feelings, and I know there's a lot more keep a stiff upper lip in my way of thinking in my generations, then that's something for us to watch and to see and to learn from, so we can all learn from each other.
Definitely.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time, but that was an interesting one, and thanks for your insights. Guests are giving their time, expanding our minds. Today's interview is in the category of financial wellness. On an earlier episode, we spoke to Rose Johnson about the importance of making a will. Our guest today is David Edey. His story fits well in the context of will planning, things to think about when making a will, especially to help the person you name as an executor. Welcome, David.
Thanks for having me, John. Great to be here.
Oh, thanks. So David is a Certified Executor Advisor who's worked in the financial planning industry in Montreal for more than 35 years. He's the author of the book Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate. He also hosts Executor Help podcast. David has personal experience with problems an executor can face. He spent 7 years and $50,000 in lawyer's fees, plus made 10 court appearances to settle his parents' will with a sibling, and he learned valuable lessons. Today we learn about some of his experiences and ask about some tips based on those experiences. So David, maybe you could start by telling us a little bit about that story that you had when you tried to settle your parents' estate and what you learned.
Well, what I learned is that you need to have conversations. Like I said at the outset, it was 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 to settle my parents' estate. And yes, they did have a will. But where my parents and a lot of people fall down in terms of making sure that the intergenerational wealth is passed from one generation to the next generation, they didn't have conversations, even though I knew what was in their will and another sibling knew what was in the will. Third sibling didn't. You would assume that everything, even though it's said in the will, it would be split three ways, that everything split three ways should be equal and fair. But a lot of times equal doesn't always mean fair. That's where we ended up having a problem because one sibling didn't agree, and we ended up in court.
And I take it if you were in court 10 times, you must have learned a lot about the law and just basically the practical problems that executors face.
Yes, I learned a lot that it's not like Law and Order, where it's over in 48 minutes. I learned that your day in court might seem like a good idea, and it's not. I had the mentality that if I just get in front of the judge, they're going to see what a moron the other side is. And if I was able to explain it to them, this would all go away and should be, ruled in our favor. But it's not that way. Court is costly. It's taxing, not only mentally, but also physically. During one of my 10 court appearances, I took time out, in between holidays to go out and have triple bypass surgery because, the stress of that ended up me having to be in the hospital. So I remember one day just sitting there, my parents would be rolling in their graves, and we were sitting in court fighting over or discussing over assets that we no longer own now as children.
Yeah, that's one thing we lament as lawyers when we see an estate matter come in that's extremely contentious, where we wish that cooler heads would prevail, because this is not what the parents wanted to happen with the money. Like, maybe the parents didn't take a vacation a couple of years so they could have more to leave for their kids. What happens? The money goes to lawyers and legal fees and court filings, which is not what they had hoped for.
Yeah, it's not a pleasant time.
No.
And that could have all been averted just by having some conversations.
Yeah, conversations are critical, and I'm glad we can get to that in a little bit. Just before we do, why did you decide to write a book?
It's been more than 10 years. And I remember, anytime I would talk about what I was going through with clients or with friends, it would always lead to an executor telling me about problems they were having, or I'd hear about another family that had broken up over a dispute. So I didn't want anybody else to have to go through what I did. So during COVID, when we were all locked up, I decided to write the book.
And the book is called Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate. And where can people find the book?
You can get the book, which is, the full name is Executor Help, How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor, and Avoid Family Fights. You can just go to my website, davidedey.com. And on that website, you can purchase the book, you can purchase the audiobook, and there's a lot of free resources such as checklists for executors, quizzes on what kind of family are. All of that you can get there at my website, davidedey.com.
And just to be clear, David Edey is Edey. I'd like to turn to an article I found in Wealth Professional online, and it's written by Noelle Boughton, and it's dated September 21, 2021. It's called 5 Tips to Save Your Clients from Estate Anguish. And she got some tips from you, and I thought they were great. And I was hoping I could review some of them with you. Well, actually, all 5 of them with you tonight. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to go through them one at a time and just ask you to comment and flesh them out a bit.
Okay.
And these are tips for somebody when they're preparing a will so that they avoid problems later on. And a lot of them are focused on helping an executor. The first says clients should share their wishes with their families. So that touches on the point you made earlier about communication and discussing with the family members.
Yeah, well, you need to figure out everything we're doing, whether you're doing a will, you're talking to the executor, you need to figure out and think about what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind. Now, a legacy isn't just about leaving your stuff behind. It's about how you leave people. So you need to figure out, what kind of legacy do I want to leave? Do I want to leave a legacy and be remembered thoughtfully, or do I want to leave a legacy and a mess? You want to make sure that you start to have those conversations with your family, organize your estate, and put in place, the mechanisms and the processes to help your executor, help them settle the estate as quickly as possible, but also let your family members know what your wishes were, and don't wait until you're no longer here and the paperwork is doing the talking for you.
So, for example, if I had 3 kids, whatever I decide, I should talk to the kids either together or each individually to let them know what I'm planning, so it's not a surprise afterwards.
Exactly, because that's probably one of the main reasons why families start to break up. I use myself as an example. There's no communication. And I get it. A lot of people, a lot of family members, head of families, matriarchs, patriarchs don't want to have that conversation because they don't want to have any hurt feelings. And so they'll let the paperwork do the talking, or they're under the illusion, my family gets along at holiday time. We just love each other. There's no reason for us to have this sort of morbid conversation. So they avoid and procrastinate. But when you do that and you resist, the one thing that's going to happen in our lifetime, spoiler alert, we're all going to die. When you resist that and don't share what your thoughts are, you're now putting your family in danger of becoming disorganized and be left in chaos.
I just think that's a great tip, and I hope people take you up on it. The second one, the way that Noelle puts it is clients should pre-book their executors. But then when I read what she's talking about, essentially what she's saying is, before you name an executor, it's a good idea to talk to that person, let them know what you're planning, and make sure they're comfortable with it. So tell me a little bit about that.
If you're choosing to have an executor, you're asking a big giant favor of them, because you're asking them on average to put aside 100 hours of their working time. You know, a lot of the job can't be done on the weekends. You're asking them to put aside 100 hours. You're asking them maybe to spend 18 to 24 months on average to sell the estate. In my case, it was, 7 years. So you're asking someone to put on to do this job. And 99% of the time, the individual who's asked to do the job, they're not prepared. They have no idea what the job is all about. And on top of that, they've got to deal with ungrateful beneficiaries who aren't interested in, the process and what you have to go through as the executor. They're only interested in their check. There's two parts to this process. When someone's leaving a legacy, they're leaving a gift to someone, to their family members. They're seeing it as something to help them with their lives. The beneficiary is looking on the other side, and they're looking and saying, hey, it's a check. When do I get my money? So we've got two conflicting sort of views of how this estate should go. So, and you as the executor, if you're not a beneficiary, you are caught in the middle, and it doesn't take much for a beneficiary to want to take you to court or to sue you or to make your life miserable because you haven't paid them their fair share of the estate, what's entitled to them.
A couple other things that come up here. I don't practice in this area, but in the article it points out that if the executor you name decides not to be the executor, they are allowed to decline, then the court has to pick somebody. And I think that's correct. Is that right in your experience?
That's correct. I have a friend of mine, talk about it in the book. They were asked to be executor, and they only found out, they got a phone call one day from a lawyer saying they'd been named by the uncle. And they decided that they didn't want to be part of, as they put it, they want to be part of the shit show, because she knew what her cousins were like and the family dynamics of being part of the estate. So she renounced, and they had to go out and find another executor. Was left up to the courts. And that's because the testator, person who drew up the will, didn't name a secondary person in case they were predeceased or someone declined to take on the job.
We're going to have to kind of go through the next few a little more quickly. We're just running out of time. But the other point that's made here is, which I think is a good one, and I'll just mention it, is when you talk to someone and they say, yes, I'll be your executor, you should also let them know, for example, if there's conflicts, from different marriages or siblings who don't get along, just give them a heads up as to what they might expect. So number 3 is that clients should enlist their advisors for will and estate talks with other professionals. And I think what you're saying here is, when you're making a will, it's good to make sure you're talking to people like your accountants as well.
Absolutely. Quick story. Another financial advisor was telling me the other day he had a client who sold a large amount of real estate to her grandson. Only thing, she didn't realize that there was going to be a huge capital gain. And when she does pass away, the estate is going to have to pay that, and it's going to eat up in the rest of the savings, which should be going to the other beneficiaries. Now, she didn't have that conversation with her accountant. She didn't even talk to the financial advisor. So before you make any decisions which are on a large scale or any scale whatsoever, when it impacts your estate and future generations, you need to talk to professionals to make sure that everything makes sense in terms of how is it going to affect the estate. And the other thing, which she hasn't done, is she hasn't had a conversation with her family. So the family doesn't know that this grandson owns this huge property, which he got at a very cheap price, and there's going to be less left to the other beneficiaries. So that's also a ticking time bomb waiting to happen. Again, from lack of conversations.
Yeah, and I'm just going to harken back for our listeners to what Rose Johnson had said. I was urging people to say, look, if you're going to do a will, at least think about talking to a lawyer. And this is an example, because lawyers will refer to accountants, and they also know other issues, and they can help deal with some of these tax questions and other questions. Okay, so the next one, number 4, clients should ask executors to communicate with beneficiaries during the process. You point out here too that it's a good idea to keep the beneficiaries at least in the loop. Among other things, sometimes, they want their check and they can be antsy, and you're busy working, and they think you're doing nothing, and then they might make some kind of complaint or something.
Exactly. As an executor, number one thing when it comes to the beneficiaries, don't go radio silent. Have a Zoom call, maybe every 2 weeks, say, hey, this is what's going on in the estate. This is what I expect to happen. This is what I think the taxes are going to be, having spoken to the accountant. I'm not going to pay out any money until we make sure the taxes are paid first, because as an executor, I urge you not to pay out beneficiaries first and then do the taxes, because if you come up short, you're held liable personally, and then try to collect that money from the beneficiaries that you've already paid. So you know what? Do the tax planning in advance. Find out from the accountant, can I send out some money, or do we have enough money right now to handle the taxes? And then I can, whatever's left over, then that will be dished out to the executors. But keep them abreast of what's going on. Do it in a timely fashion. Don't go radio silent.
You said paid out to executors, but I think you meant beneficiaries.
Beneficiaries, sorry.
Yeah,
you're right.
I just love that idea. I really love the idea of keeping them in the loop, because if somebody's told, for example, at the start of an 18-month or 2-year process that you're going to want to pay out the taxes before beneficiaries are paid out, and they know that from the start, then, it won't surprise them as much if 6 months down the line, they're still waiting, and you can say, remember what I told you before. So I like that idea of keeping them in the loop.
You keep them in the loop still doesn't mean that they're still not going to say, where's my check?
No, I get that.
You really don't know about somebody until you have to share an inheritance with them. So you need to figure out, how do I appease, their wanting for their check, and also keeping focused on the number one goal is to pay the right amount of taxes and make sure that you can, pay out the beneficiaries and then shut down the estate. So you need to make sure that you keep them in the loop of what's going on, just to make your life easier.
Okay. And the last one's pretty straightforward, but it's a great tip, which is clients should tell their executors where their digital passwords are located. So if you, either have a password list, or maybe you use something online to save your passwords, definitely tell your executors how to find all that.
Well, people don't realize that for every email address, there's probably about 130 digital addresses related to that email address, and it's probably even more than that. So, you've got your email accounts, you've got your social media, utilities, banking, websites that you maintain, and, the cloud storage. So you've got all of those passwords, and you're making it hard on the executor if they don't know where all those logins and passwords are. I have a friend, quick story, recently passed away about 6 months ago. Last week, Facebook popped up saying it's her birthday. And then she showed up also on LinkedIn. When I saw that clearly, the executor didn't know how to shut down all of the social media outlets. And each one of them has their own protocol. So you want to make it easier on the family. Their digital footprint is critical, even though it's part of our lives today. You want to make sure that there's a smooth transition to settle the estate.
Well, I feel like we could go on, and there'd be lots more tips, but we're just stuck with time. So at this point, you may or may not know, but I ask every guest the same question at the end of an interview. In the context where we all have different areas of wellness and not enough time in the day to pay attention to them all, we do a little bit of a mini check-in. And so my question to you is, are you currently neglecting an area of wellness in your life? And if so, can you think of even one activity you can do to foster wellness in that area?
Yeah, I think it's the letting go part. In our family, like I said before, we don't own the assets that my parents owned, and we haven't spent the holidays since 2011. So the family's broken up, and I've got to figure out how to let it go in terms of the broken relationship I have with the sibling. I could reconcile, I can accept who they are, or accept that we're never going to be close. It still gnaws at me that I haven't let it go and moved on with my life because of how we are 11 years later.
That's tough, and I understand how that can happen. I guess it's also one of the reasons why the tips that you give people now might help avoid that scenario for someone else down the road. So I hope you can find a way through it, a path forward. It certainly sounds like a challenging one. And thanks so much for your time today, David. I really appreciate it.
John, this was a pleasure. I really appreciate the time, and I hope I helped somebody.
I'm Cameron, and and welcome back to another installment of the Adventures of the Starving Artist. Today, I want to tell you a little bit about where my brain's been at. Obviously, the new year is fast approaching, and with that comes lots of forward thought. I've been daydreaming about things I want to have happen. I've been thinking about things that will happen. I've been dreading things that I hope don't happen, and worrying about the things that I think might happen, even though they really shouldn't. And that's, I think, par for the course for this time of year. But hand in hand with looking forward is hindsight. And so I've been looking back quite a bit lately over the things that I've done this year, and loosely the years prior. So let me tell you about the one that's been forefront of my mind lately. In 2019, just before COVID hit, a friend of mine approached me and said she wanted to write and direct a short film. And she asked if I would do the music for it. So I said, absolutely, I would love to. And without giving too much of the story away, the gist of it is, boy runs into girl, they get to know each other, they enjoy each other's company, they like each other, and they part ways. And it's centered around jazz music, and jazz is the main theme. Now, I've played some jazz, I studied some jazz in school, I've performed jazz live a few times. I will be the first to tell you that it is not my strongest point of musicianship. Not even a little bit. And that's fine. I work on it all the time, and I'm getting okay at it, but definitely not my strongest point. And that's fine. However, since it's centered around jazz, the whole score or soundtrack of the movie had to be jazz. So over the 2019, 2020, and 2021 years, I wrote, recorded, and really roughly mixed some jazz tunes to be the background tracks for this short film. When I had written them all out and recorded them loosely, I determined that I needed proper instrumentation. So I got my buddy Sam from one of the bands I used to be in, the Purple Tones, incredible drummer, to do some drums for two of the tracks. And from the same band, Ryan, incredible saxophone player, to do some sax parts. Now they're not on all the tracks, they're on two of them, but the two that they submitted for are top notch. So I got their parts, I did a really rough mix, and then of course with COVID and whatnot, the project got delayed. When I sent them off to be mixed, that got backburnered because the producers and the engineers were so backlogged with stuff because COVID, blah, blah, blah. You name it, it went wrong. Long story short, I've been sitting on these tunes for almost 3 years. And finally, one of my best friends from school, Tim Earhart, who is a world-class producer, has a chance to take some time and throw some mixes on these. So as I record this, literally as I speak, he's mixing these down for me, which is amazing. He sent me a couple drafts already, and they are incredible. So much better than my mixes were. But that's okay. I'm not a mixing engineer. This is why we have Tim. Anyway, the exciting part about this is, finally, despite all the setbacks from COVID and team reshuffling and all that stuff, we're looking like March 2023 is going to be the month of release for this short film. So I don't want to say the name yet. I don't want to spoil too much about the story, so I'm going to keep that all where it is. But I promise to update you as we get closer. In January, it looks like I'll be submitting one of these songs out into iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, blah, 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 so you can hear that along with the trailer for the short film. And when that happens, I'll be sure to let you know. Until then, though, things to look forward to. A little bit of a jazzy soundtrack album from yours truly. Not something I ever thought I would do, but it's in the works. It's coming down the pipeline. That's all for me for today. Thanks very much for tuning in. I'm Cameron. This is The Starving Artist. Until next time.
We love our listeners and thanks for joining us. Please help spread the word about Let's Be Well Together podcast. Follow us and rate us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Instagram at lets.be.well.together and let your friends know about us.
Move that body like we're meant to do.
It's Move That Body, and I'm here with Rania Atif, and she is a University of Waterloo student who likes to go for walks and rock climbing. Welcome, Rania.
Hi, John. Thanks so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk about the activities I have today.
I was hoping to chat with you a little bit about what are the kind of things you're doing in a busy life as a student, and how does walking help that?
For sure. So I'm actually in a pre-law program right now, so it's a lot of essay writing, a lot of listening to long lectures, and then I also am involved in student body governance. So again, just a lot of reading, writing, and amending things. So most of the time, I'm just sitting down on a desk in a quiet room, and sometimes I just want to kind of get out and get a breath of fresh air. And one thing is that I have to be very focused when I'm, doing any sort of work as we have to do. But during a walk, I can just be delusional. I can just be living like a main character, kind of a fantasy in my head. I really like walking on campus, especially because I know pretty much half of campus through a lot of my work. So I get to meet a ton of people. And then I really always, one thing I'm good at is that I pick the perfect song for my walks between buildings. I just look at the sky as if my eyes are like the camera in a movie, and it feels like I'm in a film. And it kind of just gives me a break from reality, essentially, and helps me also. I'm thinking about school constantly, and then I get a little break. And when I revisit those thoughts, I'm able to have more of a clear view on a lot of things that I normally wouldn't have had a clear view on, just because sometimes, you get burnt out. So I think walking really, really helps with that. Yeah, I feel like it just also adds a good amount of, exhaustion. So as soon as I'm home, I just immediately crash. I really like walking.
It sounds amazing. And there's so many things going on with your walking. So just jumping in on a couple of them. So with the music, when you go out for a walk, do you pick a song and go and walk for a bit and then pick another song in terms of what you're feeling? Or do you have a playlist?
Actually, it's a little bit of both. Sometimes if I'm in a bit of a low mood or something just didn't go my way, I like to put in a more of a softer playlist in the background, maybe just some piano playing. There's Gibran Al-Kosar, he's really good. I really like listening to what he composes. And then sometimes when I'm in a really good mood or just happy in general, I like to put on alternative rock music, and I just kind of like to bob my head around and move my fingers. And I don't really care if people look at me just, mouthing the words, even though they can't hear anything. It just makes me feel a lot more excited about whatever I have, whatever I'm walking towards or whatever is going on in my day. So it's a little bit of both. I
do that too. And I have a bunch of playlists, including alternative. So I do a lot of running. A lot of times on a long run, I'll listen to podcasts for a while, but then for the last 4 or 5 kilometers, I try and put on, depending on my mood, a different type of music. So I love that you're kind of matching your music to your mood. Sometimes
I like to incorporate podcasts into my walking as well. I actually discovered this podcast back in the summer called Heavyweight, and it was a lot about different people overcoming different barriers in their life, and that really helped with my depression and anxiety and overall imposter syndrome, which I feel like is very, very common in schooling. Sometimes I do get tired of music, sometimes I do get tired of being a main character, and sometimes I just want to be nobody. And sometimes listening to a podcast kind of helps with that, especially when I'm walking, because I can get lost in someone else's world, essentially.
There's just so many different directions we could go off in, but we don't have enough time. For example, I agree with you that there's a lot going on. People think of students at university as people who really have it together. They're really successful. They've done great in high school, which is all true. But at the same time, a lot are under tremendous amounts of stress and facing and regularly facing anxiety and to a degree depression. So anything you can find to help you in those moments is a good thing. And I definitely think walking is just, you're just so smart to be taking that time, even though probably you have to make time for it. I really appreciate that. Yeah. Okay. Before we, I don't want to conclude right away though, because you said you also like rock climbing. So tell me a little bit about how do you do rock climbing and where do you do it and what do you like about it? I do it at the university, and they pretty much have everything there, especially because it's half the cost is included in tuition. So I really only have to pay about $70 to $80 for 4 months, just a one-time payment, shoes and equipment included. So I had a problem where I just couldn't get certain anxious thoughts out of my head sometimes. I also had friends who
would either like drink or smoke to cope with that sort of stuff. And then when they started rock climbing, that completely went away because there's this huge community out there on rock climbing. And then on top of that, I made so many new friends, and it also just honestly like really helped me strengthen my physical strength as well. It's just a really great way of also not thinking for a bit.
We interviewed somebody about rock climbing a little bit earlier, and one of the things he liked about it was that you really have to focus on the moment. You know, you're looking really at what's right in front of you, and that's a really good way to kind of drive other thoughts out of your head. So I totally get where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm, yeah. And then especially when I was rock climbing and getting used to it, just completely random strangers saw me and they kept going like, you can do it, you put your foot there, don't lose your grip. And it was just this great sense of support and community that just surrounds, rock climbing.
Well, this is all just amazing. So that's it for today, Rania, but I really appreciate you coming on and telling us a little bit about what you enjoy and what you get out of it.
For sure. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to listening to more about your podcast.
Thank you. There's a thought. Popped up while running. I happened to catch a news story when I was getting ready for my run, and it was one of the typical stories where one group had done something really terrible a long time ago, and another group got revenge, and since then there have been back and forth, vengeful attacks, nobody being able to turn the other cheek, etc. So I don't like thinking about that, so I tried not to. Somehow it snuck into my thoughts when I was running, but the thought that popped into my head was that if you're thinking about getting even with someone, this is my experience. If I'm thinking about getting even with someone, if I have thoughts of vengefulness because somebody did something that either harmed me or somebody I know, and that gets me angry, it's really hard to live in the present. I'm either focused on the terrible thing that happened, and that causes stress and anxiety and even some pain, or I'm thinking about what's going to happen in the future, these imaginary ways I'm going to get back at people that I would never do. But it's hard not to think about. But whatever I'm thinking, I'm not thinking about the present moment. And it's really important for a whole bunch of wellness exercises, endeavors, pursuits, that we're living in the moment, that we're seeing what's in front of us, that we're making the most of each minute, and that we're focusing on things like mindfulness. A lot of wellness exercises bring us to the moment and help get rid of stress and other problems in our life. So anyway, so that's what occurred to me. Wasn't expecting it, but that was today's pop-up. It's me. Am I?
Yeah. Just let me say, flip side of the coin.
I'm enjoying talking to Sheila about articles I find. Mm-hmm. And it's really cool because you talk about these and I find them over the period of months. Something just pops up, I throw it in a folder, and then I say, hey, you want to talk about this? So this time, interesting article.
Yeah.
And
really
just want to say that I'm not endorsing it. We don't know if it's true or not. It's a study, but we just thought it was really interesting because it reminded us of our own experiences. Yeah. So that's the focus is. But we have to say what the article is first. And here's what it says. The title is A for Attractive. Good-looking female college students saw their grades drop during COVID pandemic when professors couldn't see their faces. And the article is by Mansur Shaheen, Deputy Health Editor for dailymail.com, and it was published on November 9, 2022. And essentially what it does is it talks about a study that was done, and the result of this study, which I think was in Sweden, was that if you had what they call qualitative courses where teachers and students were more likely to interact, it wasn't things like math and physics where there's only one right answer. So there's some subjective element.
Right.
The marks of attractive women were dropping when they weren't seeing them face to face.
Yeah.
And it just seems, and then later on too, just for a little bit more context after the whole discussion, it talks about multiple past studies found a value in being attractive in the workforce. And a 2005 study found that attractive people with the same credentials are offered a salary 10% higher than their peers.
Yeah. No, and I've definitely experienced this in life that
because you're so good looking.
No. More to the effect that if I go grocery shopping, or not grocery shopping, but more clothes shopping, or if I'm doing something, people don't take me as seriously if I'm not dressed up and have my hair done and maybe makeup on, and if I took the time to take care, I get much better service.
Kind of like in Pretty Woman when she goes into the store and they don't pay attention to her.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's just exactly the situation that I've had. And I definitely found this when I was younger, because I really felt that people didn't take you very seriously when you were young. So if you dressed appropriately and looked the part, you got more attention.
The other really interesting thing about the article is it said they did not find the same effect with men. It only worked with attractive women.
Well, that's not what you found, though.
Well, what you're talking about is I felt like when I was really overweight, it's not that I noticed bad treatment, but then when I lost a lot of weight and was looking a little bit better, I did find that I was getting better treatment.
Yeah, from the same people.
Right. So like at a counter, Service Ontario to get driver's license or wherever, all of a sudden it was like, oh, how can I help you? And what do you need? Whereas before it was like, what do you want?
Yeah. Wait in line.
Yeah. So
yeah. So that's really interesting that during COVID, they didn't get the marks that they would normally get when they're in person.
It's really tough though, too, because if you were to say, like, let's say we knew an attractive college student who had benefited from good marks, and then it's COVID, they don't get the same benefit. Maybe their marks drop a bit. Like, they didn't do anything. You know, like, it's hard. You know, it's like, not that there's something to blame. It's not like, oh, you never deserved that in the first place, so you deserve some kind of punishment. It's
right.
It's so awkward. But
yeah, it's not like they're doing it on purpose. But if they are changing their appearance in order to do something on purpose, like if they're flirting or they're wearing clothes that, may be more flirtatious. And so the professor is like, that's a good opinion.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's like overtly trying to get good marks. I don't think that happens too much.
Right. No, but I mean, the point is that I do think that we're actually getting better at this in society, because we are being a little bit more careful how we evaluate people and judge people and that kind of thing. So I think we're getting better at taking people for their merits and listening and appreciating. I
agree. And at the end of the day, like I said, whether the study's true or not, it's just a good point that some of these things are really important. Like whether you give people raises, whether you give people promotions, whether you hire somebody, the marks you give in university and college and wherever that are going to affect people's lives. It's all important stuff.
Yeah.
So let's please be judging people on merit and try and read out things like what they look like and what they sound like and whether they're friends and all that stuff.
Yeah, I agree. Totally.
Please remember that we're not providing advice. We hope to inspire you to work towards balance, and we urge you to consult with qualified people if you need advice. The people on the show are speaking in their personal capacities. Their views expressed are their own and don't represent the views or opinions of their outside contacts, their employers, or anyone else. We try to get things right, but we can't guarantee everything we say is correct or that the things we talk about will work for you. Let's be well together, and let's be sure to do that in a safe way. We are at sign-off time, and it's John with Sheila and Sammy. Hey, guys.
Hi. Hey.
Well, okay, so last week on sign-off, I said that I was going to try something new. I'm having a hard time not laughing because our tables are all mixed up because we're having a party here today and we had to push all the fancy podcast studio into a corner. So we're standing up, which means we have to hold the mics a little different. And Sheila is just standing like a statue and just staring ahead. And
well, it's anyone who knows me knows that I really talk a lot with my eyes and my head and everything. So I'm trying to stand still and not make a sound.
Because if the cords move around, then it changes the sound. But this is really hard to concentrate without laughing. But okay. So I did start waking up early, and I've been going to the gym either around 6:30, 7, somewhere in the 6:30 to 7:15 range, running about 5K. I haven't started adding any weights yet. Man, I feel amazing. I've also been drinking a lot of water during the day, which I haven't done for a long time, and I forgot what a difference that makes. And so the short version is I just feel amazing, and knock on wood that I can keep this up for a few weeks so that I can really feel how I feel after a month of doing it. But after week 1, it's pretty promising. How about you, Sammy?
Yeah, that's great. I'm also trying to get back into better routines. David is lucky and he got 2 weeks off. So he goes back tomorrow. But that means that I've been a little bit lazy this week too, because I'm like, oh, you're off. So I get to kind of just hang out yeah, I need to get better at waking up. I feel like tomorrow's going to be rough, but we're going to go for it. I need to get back into my better routine. So hoping for that this week.
Well, it's a new year, so who knows? It's a good time for a fresh start.
Well, it's funny because it sounds like we're all kind of in a little different loop because John's in the I'm feeling great right now. And I'm kind of like in the feeling of trying to get back into the routine, but I don't want to. So I'm like, I'm kind of angry that I can't eat what I want to eat. And, you know, I have to work out. And, you know, I'm at that point right now where I'm just like, I'm not ready yet. I just want to relax and enjoy my vacation. So, and I think you're at the point where you haven't actually gotten into it yet. So
haven't even been there.
Yeah, 3 separate stages we are.
It is true. You have to want it. That's the biggest reason why if somebody is saying something and I'm thinking you got to get back into working out or eating right or whatever, I never say it because at the end of the day, until you want it, until someone's like, hey, I want to do this. Do you have something to suggest? Then I'll suggest it. But unless they ask, I don't, because at the end of the day, you really need to want it before it's going to make an impactful change in your life.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. Well, that's kind of a short one, but a good one. And we're done with 1 week and we'll look forward to seeing everyone again next week.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
That is it for today's show. Please try and make wellness a priority.
You deserve it.
If you feel the need to talk to someone or ask for help, please do that.
Accept yourself for the person you are.
So long.
Adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.